Hey guys, it is day 17, and I was able to start my ADHD training today. That video training series I was talking about yesterday, and I am loving this first presenter. I think he does at least 6 hours of the training, so I'm really excited about that. His name is Dr. David Noel. If I remember, I will link it in the description of the video, and I'm gonna have to check out and see what books he's written too. But I figured for today, because I've been doing pretty good on all of my doing well, excuse me, on all of my sort of behavioral targets and goals that I've established recently, which feels so good. Like sitting and reading my EMDR book earlier for 45 minutes and no distractions, haven't been on Instagram or Facebook, haven't been using devices much except for specific targeted things. So all of it feels really good. And I know that I can't get complacent, that it has to continue to be a day to day commitment. So, but just briefly checking in on that, so far, so good. So I thought I would just share a few of the takeaways from, I've only watched like 45 minutes and already I have a ton of takeaways. And this first lecture is called Changing the ADHD Brain Beyond Medication. So I'm only just now getting into the chunk that is going to be most useful, where he starts to break down like, okay, what can we actually do with neuroplasticity and so on, and what are the strategies and how can we change the environment to rewire the brain, without beyond medication, so without medication or in addition to. Okay, so let's see here. If you see me glancing over here, it's because I'm scrolling through my notes. um I love, this is maybe a paraphrase quote, but he talked a lot about in this initial part about the structure of the brain and neurotransmitters and all of that, and how ADHD is essentially, it's a dopamine problem. And I'm sure I'll get more and more into in depth on that piece of it. But so he says the best thing I can do for ADHD folks is to direct them to what lights them on fire. And that resonates with me so much because I know that I am able to have that kind of hyper focus and be in the zone and feel really good when I'm doing something I really care about. So, of course, life can't only be that, which is why we need to have other strategies, but I really resonated with that. He talked about how music is dopaminergic, how there's that constant, like, there's the tension and the resolve, the tension and the resolve. There's the little puzzles that we're getting to figure out, and that's part of what draws us to music and makes it dopaminergic. So he talked about how useful it is to create study playlists of specific kinds of music. He actually mentioned that video game soundtracks are really good for that because they tend to be sort of high energy, active without being distracting. So he's got his own whole Spotify playlist that he linked to, which I might be able to put in the description as well. But basically, any video game playlist, which there are tons. Ori and the Blind Forest, I think, is one that we love listening to. Elder Scrolls. So I don't even play these games. My husband plays some of them, but I do really enjoy the music. And Ambient Worlds, that I maybe have mentioned here before, is a great YouTube channel that has tons of several hour long kind of tracks, whether some of them are from video games, some of them are like Harry Potter, etc. So another thing he mentioned was the SQ3R approach to reading. So, say, for instance, that I was having to study for something, instead of just like having that dread and overwhelm and like sitting down and just trying to drill it, this SQ3R is basically, okay, survey. So like, let me just take, what is this thing? Like, what do I need to know? What am I trying to, what am I looking at here? So just kind of do a brief survey of it, 30, 60 seconds, and then question, what do I want to know about this? And even if you're like, oh, well, this isn't even anything I care about, it's like, okay, well, if I were someone who cared about this, what would I want to know? So coming up with a few questions just to kind of start to engage your brain. And then read one paragraph at a time and recite, that's the other R, the second R, read, recite it back. So can you summarize it? If not, you didn't really process it. You need to go back and reread that paragraph. And then after you've done that, read and recite, read and recite, read and recite. Once you're done with however much you're going to do, review. So kind of do that survey thing again, flip back through it, take the big view over what you just processed. So I really like that. I don't think I'll need to use it for everything, but I think if there were a particularly challenging thing that I was needing to work my way through, that SQ3R is a pretty good strategy. One thing you mentioned is that the brain starts to shrink at age 30, around age 30, but the hippocampus, the part that's responsible for taking things and putting them into our long-term memory, continues to regenerate across the lifespan. And what is one of the best things we can do to help it regenerate? Movement. Exercising 3 times a week. So we know that exercise or movement is so good for so many reasons, but that was a really exciting one for me to hear specifically. Let's see. So talking about how some of the similarities and differences between ADHD and something like sensory processing disorder, because there, in terms of differential diagnosis, sometimes there can be some overlap. But ADHD is really a top-down kind of problem, because the issue is in our executive functioning. Whereas with sensory processing disorder, the issue is with, there's some kind of way that the actual, what's happening with these sensory inputs is processing in a different way. And so there's like unpleasant by the time it reaches the brain. It's registering as unpleasant instead of like starting from the brain and then working its way to the senses. So anyway, just talking more about the sort of top-down nature of ADHD really being a top-down disorder. It's about determining what's important. So that's part of the executive functioning that is not working properly, that it's difficult for ADHD folks to determine what to do, what to pay attention to, what to prioritize. And as he said, that's the existential burden of living with ADHD. And you throw the word existential in there and I'm just swooning. So, so he says, making these top-down choices, like these executive functioning choices, what to do, what to pay attention to, moment to moment to moment, what gets my attention now and now and now, when there's so many options. And he said, you can do and be and have anything, but not everything, and certainly not all at once. And I was like, nah, this is the story of my life. And talking about how we've got to choose something long enough to actually get skillful with it. Even if that's choosing one relationship long enough to get skillful with that, or whatever, like one task, one, skill set. So the how do we choose is more challenging for folks with ADHD. Let's see. And so then talking about how that overlaps with our society now, he said, we don't live in an information age. The content itself is not the problem. We live in an attentional industrial complex, right? Where there are these economic interests that are trying to get our attention, and we're having to make all these top-down decisions within that context. So it's really challenging. He talked about how we all need different amounts of stimulation. And so, for instance, like during a workshop, like the one he was giving, which there were some people there live and I was watching the video, he's like, some of you will be fidgeting or kind of, pulling at your hair, shaking your leg, whatever. Some of you will do it kind of about as much as I do. And some of you will do it more, and maybe that to a point of being hyperactive. And those are sort of stimming behaviors. So we hear of that term with things like autism or sensory processing disorder. We hear that kind of stimming, that self-stimulation as a self-soothing behavior, but folks who are hyperactive are doing it as well, because we need that stimulation. We need more stimulation than the average person. And I relate to that so much too. I mean, during workshops and things, I am up, I'm stretching, I'm moving around, I'm doing 18 things, just to kind of have that self-stimulation or stimming behavior. Let's see. And he also has talked about how you don't necessarily have to have sensory processing disorder or ADHD to be bombarded by stimulus, because, again, look at the culture we're in. Look at the what we're bombarded by on screens. And I picture like the Times Square image or a state fair. There's so much hyperstimulation everywhere that it's easy for anyone to get overwhelmed, let alone if you have one of these things where it makes it difficult to take in a lot of stimulation or to know how to direct your focus or attention to what matters. Let's see. So I think that's the biggest things that I wanted to get to today. So we're going to talk about, or I'm going to get into the next part of it of what are the things that we can do with neuroplasticity, with behavioral strategies, and with changing the environment. And I'm really excited about the rest of that. So I hope this was interesting for you. I know I was talking super fast. Sorry. That's what I do when I get excited, and I don't intentionally slow myself down. So hopefully you picked up some of that. All right. I'll see you guys tomorrow.